Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining. Thanks for jumping on. I'm Courtney. I think I see a couple of you there. Thanks for coming along to another cropping convo. Today we're with Jill Clapperton, and we're going to be discussing companion planting. A little bit about Soils for Life before we kick off. We're a not-for-profit. Our mission is to support Australian farmers to regenerate soils for resilient businesses, landscapes, and communities. I'm the project manager at Soils for Life, and I'm running our cropping resilience project, which this event is part of, which is all about supporting grain growers. And we have a bunch of awesome resources and run a bunch of activities and events like this. We've also got these really fantastic practice guides that we're just starting to release that are available on our website if you're interested. I'll hand over the mic to Jill in a second, and she can kind of introduce the topic of companion planting for 10 to 15 minutes. And then we're going to just jump into a really casual Q&A. So feel free to just throw your questions in the chat. You can come off mute and we can just have a really casual conversation. Okay. Jill, thank you again for joining us. We've had Jill join us for some cropping discussion groups in the past. Dr. Jill Clapperton is the principal scientist and owner of Rhizoterra Inc. She's internationally recognized educator on how to create, measure, and maintain healthy, productive soils that produce tasty and nutrient-dense food. Jill will tell us where she's phoning in from today, but she is from the US. So thanks so much for joining us, Jill. And we figured out the time zones eventually.
Yeah, we did. So I'm coming to you today from Circle 7 Farms, so Fuller Farms, in Severy, Kansas. And Gail and Lynette do some really interesting things. Pasture pork. We have ducks outside. I don't know if you can hear them, but they're quacking away. There's a turkey who's decided he really likes me and needs to display himself. And we have cattle and sheep and the whole thing. So and Gail does I'll put a plug in for Fuller Field School, and which will be at the end of September and the beginning of October. Gail and I have worked together for a long time. And so I'm here just visiting friends, and I was on my way home. And the strangest thing happened to me. We were going to make coffee, so because I've got like a 3-hour drive, and the coffee wouldn't work, and then Courtney phoned. I was like, oh, it's time to do this. I was like, yeah, okay, I guess I was supposed to be delayed. So a little background on me. I was a research scientist for 16 years with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, working as part of an integrated team with soil scientists, livestock people, and whatnot. And then after 16 years, I went to work on my own. Now, I've had a pretty varied career. I've done a lot of things, including building green drinks and working in human supplements. And then my last job was to work was working for my own company I co-founded, Audacious, where we were trying to connect, how we grow food with the nutrients that are in the food. And now I'm back working on my own with Rhizoterra, and talking to farmers and gardeners and people like that about how we can improve our soils and how we can use plant with purpose, and plant in a way that helps improve our soils. With always, when we're planting, no matter what we're planting, we're always trying soil health has to be our underlying principle. And so we're always talking about soil in the underlying, as soil health as the underlying principle of everything that we do. Intercropping and companion cropping are kind of similar in some ways. So I'm going to launch into this because I don't want to take up too much time. And you're welcome to ask me questions along the way here. I can bring up slides or we can have a conversation. I think people know what companion cropping is. So I'm going to ask questions right away. Can we let people speak? Would that work for you, Courtney?
Yeah, of course. No worries.
Okay. Because I'm going to ask some questions now, and then that will determine kind of how we're going to proceed from here. It's terrible allergy time here. All spring is breaking, and we've been burning up the prairie, so it's pretty smoky today. So tell me about, since you're here on the Cropping Convos, wanting to learn about companion croppings, maybe each one of you could just start with what you know about companion cropping and what you'd like to learn from this presentation, or what you'd like to learn from me, and how I can add things in. So I can start with whoever wants to start. So you get to be off mute and tell me a little bit about why you're here, wanting to learn about companion crops.
I'll pick on someone. Helen, are you there? Maybe not.
Oh. David?
I could say something if you like.
Sure.
Look, I'm here because I don't quite understand the when it's best to try for a companion crop, when it's best to use a multi-species crop, and what the challenges are that people face when trying to do either. I understand the difference, but I don't necessarily understand the opportunities and challenges between the two as well as I'd like to.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So, okay. So when would you when would you choose to use a companion? When would you choose to use a cover? And yeah, all right. And then what would you use? Okay, we'll talk about that. And what are you growing? Tell me about your cropping system, David.
Well, Jill, just to be clear, like I work at Soils for Life. I don't have a broadacre cropping system, so
Okay.
but I'm very curious about that.
All right. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So I recognize Rob from before. So Rob, how about you? What are you thinking? You heard me last time, so what more are you thinking that you'd like to get from today?
Yeah, well, actually, I have got a question.
Okay.
Our cereals this year, they were going like 3 up to 4 ton on 8 inches of rain. So we had a good average on our cereals. That's why everyone grows grass, because it's easier to grow grass. But with our multi-species, we only, we averaged 2.85 on our cereals. And on the multi-species, we only average 1.2.
Oh.
So what let them down was the actual legume component, because obviously, with the season, it's been pretty stressful. And then that's the first time I've had a big infestation of aphids came in, and they touched up they mainly went for the favours and the vetch. I did have some budworm on the lupins for the first time. So obviously they're under a fair bit of stress. I sort of have discussed it with a guy, sap analysis and that, and obviously, nutrition can still override that. But it seemed to be that the cereals obviously they took dominance. So I'm just wondering, obviously, because I know there have been years when when you have a good season, the legumes do actually, flourish as such. But I'm just wondering, like, how I can get around it. So normally we sow 7 kilos of rice, 7 of wheat, and 7 of barley. We're thinking of actually reducing the rye a little bit because that's a smaller seed and that sort of can dominate. We are still going for yield because we provide this grain to a dairy. And then it's a mixture of, or the total mix is 70 to 80 kilos. So, we've got fabers, we've got lupins, we've got, 3 or 4 kilos of vetch, peas. And then we're thinking of putting some tillage radish in this year as well. So I'd like to put a bit of safflower in, but I don't know if that's going to happen. So I'd just like your comment on that.
Yeah, so are you silaging this? Are you cutting it?
No, we direct head it and store it and sell it to a dairy as it is, the grain.
Oh, okay, as for the grain. Okay,
So
I
it's
understand.
a cash crop.
Okay. And then what you were describing is your cover crop that is after your cash crop. Is that correct?
Yeah, we
I'm a
usually
bit confused.
pick the cleanest paddocks because obviously weeds can be an issue. So this is a cover crop and a cash crop in one, if you can put it like that.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So
Well,
when do you
the only
seed that?
cover crops we do now is just tillage, radish, and lupin. So, but the rest of it, we do it as a cash crop. Obviously, got to keep money coming in.
So, okay. So I'm going to ask some questions so I really understand this, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
And so you're growing them together from what I'm gathering.
yeah.
And then you're harvesting the grain for grain, and then you let the cash crop grow up after that, or are you actually taking seed off everything, like the vetch?
No.
The
Yeah,
beans?
we let it mature and then harvest the whole lot as it is.
Okay. And then you bale it, or do you haylage, or like what do you do with it?
We store it in a sausage bag and then we sell it
Okay.
to a dairy.
Okay, that's what I was trying to understand.
Yeah.
So, okay. And so when you get multi-species in there at the same time, they're taking away your yield from your cash crop.
Well, no, the legume component in that cash crop, cover crop, call it what you like, a multi-species, like when you get a bit of a dry year, they don't perform like the cereals do. So
That's correct.
I'm wondering if that's a nutritional thing like calcium phosphate, manganese, and all those sorts of things. So, or whether it's
Okay.
just they don't like the competition. I mean, like the cereals always seem to dominate. So in our environment,
Yeah,
whatever's there in the
legumes
cereal.
are totally non-competitive. Like they really won't compete very well. They don't. If you really want legumes in your mix, like really want them in your mix and you want to maintain them in your mix, you need to back off on your cereals and increase on your legumes. And then the other thing is to choose legumes that are going to take the dry a little bit more. And Desi chickpeas and lentils are going to do that more for you than any of the other choices that you made there.
Well, I'd have to probably disagree with you on the chickpeas because they're
Okay.
probably the least competitive.
Well, they're not competitive. Okay. Again, you would have to change your mix so that you allowed for more legumes. The chickpeas are very drought tolerant. So they're one legume that would take the drought, like in dry years, would take the drought a whole lot better. And lentils are the same way. They'll take the drought a whole lot better than lupins or fava beans. That's what I'm saying there.
Yeah.
So if you're anticipating a drought or a really dry time, you can make another choice. Now you still want biomass, right? Because you're trying to hay this off for a dairy. So one of the things to think about is when you're growing this, if it's that hot, and is it just dry or is it hot and dry?
Well, it depends on the season, but it can be both.
Right. All right. So I've been having chats about this all day today. One of the things is to think about some warm season legumes too, like mixing them in, like forage soybeans. Because they'll take the heat, they'll take the dry. That'll give you another legume. And I would push your percentage up a little bit if the dairy will take a higher protein mix. The other thing, that first thing that happened to me was when you said you had problems with bugs on all your legumes, is, well, obviously they're looking for nitrogen. Why did they hit the legumes and not anything else? And so that also tells you another little story about, probably the fact that you might need to look at your fertility of what you're planting, like when you're doing your growing out your cover crop. But one of the things I would really think about is the recommendation from me would be to push back your grasses a little bit and push up your legumes. So I like a 50-50 mix. And if I'm really struggling with legumes, then I go 70 legumes and 30% grass. And that will be an excellent mix for dairy. I mean, for dairy, that actually is a lactation mix.
Well, the
So you
mix
can
at the
think about
moment
that.
is probably about 20 kilos of grass or cereals and, 50 to 55, 60 of legumes. So,
So
I
it should
don't-
work.
I don't know whether I really want to back the cereals off anymore. And the other thing we got to put it in early, and even if it goes in dry, so it's actually maturing when it's cool.
So the peas, yeah, I mean, that's hard, like when the legumes are not producing when it's too dry. And you actually have a good mix there.
Last year, only had 8 inches for the whole year. The guys in South Australia had less, but I mean, one would hope that well, never say never, we always seem to be getting some sort of harshness or something, but I think the tillage radish would help as well, putting some of that in with the mix.
I would say tillage radish, but also think about forage radish, right?
Yeah,
Do you know forage rape?
yeah,
So forage rape has a really deep root, and it doesn't have the tuber. It depends on whether you want the tuber, but if you're haying, you don't necessarily want the tuber part, unless you want soil structure change. So why not go with a forage rape? It'll give you a brassica, nice brassica, deep roots, and you'll get that advantage of holding on to your nitrogen. And the other thing is maybe not safflower. Sunflower tends to take the cold, since you're planting you're trying to do early, and then going into cool. I mean, why not think about sunflowers as opposed to safflower?
yeah,
And that would give you an oil seed in there, like some kind of an oil seed, which could be good. And with the aphids in that, I would really look at your nutrition in that case. And in the drought, yeah, things really concentrate in plants,
I mean,
and that can
this was
rest and.
this was the 4th year of doing this, and last year was the only year we really had bad insect problems, so it's not a usual thing that we get. So, but
So
there
you
is nutrition, tied in with that whole scenario. I mean, I firmly believe that. So we're always bumping along the bottom. So
Can I?
Yeah. So, yeah.
anyway, I've held the seat for long enough. So thank you for that, Jill.
Well, I
Thanks.
don't know that I helped that much, but I mean, think about some other choices there, and I'm just gonna look at the chat too. See,
Tom, if you're there, can you come off mute and share any contributions you have or questions you have?
Hey, Rob, you really missed a good chat yesterday around aphids and nutrition. I might have to give you a ring.
Oh, who is that with?
That was our little cropping group we got going at the local pub. Like
Okay.
she
Yep.
and Dr. Michael Nash and a few others. Yep. Yeah.
oh,
Big
right.
conversation around mineralization. So
Yeah,
mineral
well, I've had a discussion with Peter Norwood, and he ran through it, and you know, because obviously you've got alkaline soil, so manganese is not available, and they're responsible for reducing sugars. So it's all about the balance of the chemistry and the minerals. So I hear what you're saying, and you got to still get the biology in there as well. So, but when it's dry, it's hard for moisture to, you know, activate all those things. So
we had severe magnesium deficiencies early last year, and that's basically just, you know, when we have year again like what we're having now, where we've had zero rain now since the end of October, and we're about to start another planting season. We've had no mineralization, and you know, we're planting everything on that first rain. That we just don't have enough mineralization early, so those little plants are severely deficient in a few different trace elements. And for us, magnesium was one of them, and we're suspecting it's going to be the same again. So making sure we've got adequate nutrition on the seed as a seed treatment, and then be prepared to go in a lot earlier with our first foliar if it's going to stay dry like this.
yeah,
Do
I'm
you,
hearing you, and soluble silica is something I've got to put in the equation as well.
Yep, I'll give you a ring.
All right, thank you.
Hello,
So-
Jill. How are you?
hey, I'm fine, Tom. How are you?
Can you pass on
with
a big
that-
hug? Can you pass on a big hug to Gail and Lynette for Cassie and I, please?
Gail, did you hear that?
I've actually sat exactly
over
where
here.
you sat.
Oh, okay. He'll be over here in just a minute, and then you can say hi to him for yourself. Guess who this is? Tom Robinson.
I know him.
Hey, Gail, how are you?
Gail Fuller. Gail's a friend. You get two people that have done companions and cover cropping and things like that. Sometimes two heads are better than one. And Tom just said, give you a big hug from him. So here we are.
Yep,
Big
yep.
hug.
There we go.
Yeah.
Same to you, bud.
So question for you with about your magnesium, are you using Epsom salt? And then
Yeah,
are you spraying Epsom salt?
yeah, a lot. So we're dissolving all our own traces, and yes, use a lot of Epsom salts. Yep.
Okay.
And then
That's really
also,
important too.
yeah, also
Because the
putting a
Epsom
little bit of
salts
boron in as well.
with the sulfur and the boron, all those things are really important for bugs, especially when you're dealing in a drought situation. So just another, yeah, and the mineralization you don't. I mean, in dry soils, we don't get mineralization. And the other thing is that the crop residues, especially with rye and things like that, we can actually get allelopathy. I've seen it on my own place where even 2 years later, since I'm not breaking everything down because it's being so dry, that, you know, when the milo grows, my grain sorghum is growing, when it rains, it actually, the plants actually decrease in growth. And then when it's dry, they actually start growing because of the water leaching out the residues. So, this whole idea of dryness and things staying is really a big deal. It really is. All right, James has his hand up, so
Yeah,
go, James,
thanks.
go.
Jill, would you be able to clarify for me what the Epsom salts is doing there? That that Tom is talking about, just to help me understand? Maybe there's somebody else who's not following also.
Yeah, Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate. And they're a really easy form, and because they're not a chloride, they're not in a chloride form, then you also get the sulfate part of it, which helps build the immune system of plants. So young plants need a lot of sulfur in order to build their immune system. And a lot of times we don't put enough sulfur with things. So I mean, Epsom salts are really nice because you get the magnesium, which is good for germinating plants, but then you get also the sulfur, which they need for their immune system. And the other thing is it dissolves very well in water. It's not really salty, so the plants don't, especially in a drought situation, don't have to lose water in order to balance the osmotic potential of the solution that you're putting on. So you don't exacerbate the drought part of it. And that's true for even being on the seed. You don't want to exacerbate, you don't want the plant to have to leak out the water that it's collected in the seed in order to survive, because that's not what we want. We want good establishment. So that's part of, why the Epsom salt's there. Does that help? Yeah, okay.
Tom, can you share what you've been up to with companion planting and any kind of challenges you have?
It's a love-hate relationship.
Well, okay, well, wait a minute. So Tom, talk about, we had a question earlier about clarifying between companions and covers. And and so I'm going to start, and then I'm going to ask you to chime in there. Covers are sometimes hard for me to get in, because I'll take my cash crop off late enough that I can't get a cover in. Now, if I do more like Rob, where I have my cover already in my field, and I take my cash crop off and then it grows up, and then, okay, I can do things with that. But if I have to try and get one in before or get one in after, it's very difficult for me to do that because the conditions just don't work out. We have dry conditions like Tom does, and a lot of times in the fall, I won't get rain until spring. So in fact, I have one in the field right now, a cover in the field right now that has been there all winter. It got rain, it germinated, then it dried out, and I lost everything. And then I thought, well, okay, not everything sprouted. So then I got a good rain, everything sprouted and established itself, and it's still super tiny because it's dry. So, that's a case of, I'm going to seed right into that. It's tiny enough that I can seed into that right now. So I'm going to do that. And then I'll end up with something, I hope I'll end up something that Rob talks about, where I've got all this forage underneath, like a cash crop. And that's something that I think will work in that case. Companions, I like companions because it allows me to minimize my herbicide use, or even actually just get rid of it. And if I get my companions right, they will support the nitrogen needs and some of the nutritional needs of my crop, my cash crop. Or maybe they will support beneficial insects. And then I don't have to deal with insecticides. So that's why I'm doing companions. And then sometimes I'm using it in the case of winter canola to actually protect my canola. So I grow a companion that will grow fast over my very young winter canola, with the idea of protecting it from freeze-thaw cycles. Okay, so that's my take. And then So I'll let Tom go and then we'll talk about how we choose what we're doing in there. So go ahead, Tom, and talk about your love-hate relationship.
And then of course the next thing's the intercropping, which is growing 2 crops at once.
Yeah,
And then taking them both through to
and you can
harvest.
talk about that later. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Covers for us has been typically we have done some in the summertime when it does occasionally rain, but obviously that's using a lot of water that we could be saving for the next crop, whether that is a companion crop in the wintertime. So understanding moisture limitations, especially in the last 2 years, has just been massive for us. We have grown a mixed species mixed species cover crops, but then to make money out of that, we buy in stock of cattle and then graze them, and then trade those
Right.
cattle to try and recoup some of the seed costs and seeding costs. But that's typically done when we are growing our cash crop. So for Southern Australia, like Rob and I, we've really got one growing season a year, and that's typically between the end of April and late October. So we've done that, and then companion plantings. It's just typically we have done a little bit of, say, peas under some wheat. We trialed some peas under some wheat and then sprayed it out. This year we're actually going to have a crack at a couple of kilos to the hectare of flax in with our lentils. So we're seeing a decline in soil carbon when we're growing lentils. And that's
right.
thanks to Dr. Michael Nash's work. So just and lentils when they are so good are a great money spinner for us. They're one of our most profitable crops. So they're quite tight in the rotation here in South Australia. So how can we're thinking along the lines, can we just put in a couple of kilos of something like linseed or flax, get that root system in with the lentils, and then even if we don't harvest the linseed, blow the linseed out the back of the harvester when we harvest it. The other option would be to take them both through to harvest into the combine and clean them out. So yeah, I've done more intercropping. I've done more intercropping than I have straight companions.
Yeah, I think for me, so thinking about what you've done there from a companion standpoint, I like things that are lower to the ground, which is why like I do wheat and chickpeas. And why, so I can show people what that looks like. I can share my screen, Courtney.
Yeah, I think you should be able to.
Okay. That's not the screen that I want to look at. Just give me a second here. That's doing that. Stop there. Let me give you the, I didn't bring up, there we are. Here we are. All right, you should be able to see this. Can you see my screen now?
Thank
Are you
you.
seeing a picture of wheat and chickpeas?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is on dry land, wheat dry land. And chickpeas, like the Desi chickpeas, just grow really close to the ground, and they are really drought tolerant. They like the heat. And you have to use a bit more seed. So, and the other thing I don't like about peas is that they like to grow up tall. I want things that are on the ground. I really do. So I like the lentils. I like the chickpeas because they take the heat. They're drought tolerant. If I want something else, Persian clover is another one that's really nice because it's also very drought tolerant. And again, I'm companion cropping. I'm not intercropping here. So I got a legume. It's going to give my wheat some nitrogen. It's going to feed, so it's going to feed my wheat directly. I don't share diseases with the wheat with any of these things. And I'm not going to get diseases. I'm not going to get bug pests necessarily with my wheat. People grow taller things. I just like short things. Even subclover is great in this. I don't need it to be robust. I just need it to cover the ground. I just need it to form nodules. I just need it to feed my wheat. So I just need it to feed the cereal that it's with. That's a different scenario from Rob. Because I'm not trying to grow forage at this point. I'm just really trying to cover the ground between the rows. I'm trying to smother out the weeds. I'm trying to feed my cash crop. And for me, that's more of what a companion's about. And at the same time, I'm building soils. Chickpeas will also take down your carbon a little bit, Tom, just because they acidify the soil to a certain extent. And so they'll burn up some carbon. But, you know, if you get a rain, you should increase mineralization, which will all be good for everything, which you can't do if you don't have a legume. So, you know, it's sort of a trade-off, I would say.
So what are the ratios of seed that you put in that, Jill?
I have a full seeding rate of wheat, and I use a half seeding rate of chickpeas. So in this case, my chickpeas, they were Desi chickpeas, and they were at 34 pounds to the acre, which is essentially 34 kilos to a hectare.
Sarah
And
has
you
asked a
can
question.
even broadcast them if you want, but I actually drilled them in. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll come back to Terry's question, but Sarah has asked a question about if there are any rules of thumbs relating to planting rates when you're
Yeah,
thinking
I
about
think there are.
plants.
Yeah. I've also underseeded with sweet clover. So I started my companion cropping or underseeding with sweet clover into wheat. Because at one point we were in southern Alberta, we were doing a lot of fallowing. And so the idea was to have something as an alternative to fallow. And sweet clover worked really well. So we underseeded our wheat with sweet clover. And the sweet clover stayed really low under the canopy. We'd harvest the wheat and then we'd have sweet clover instead of a fallow the next year. I can tell you that in order to establish to underseed the sweet clover into a wheat crop, you have to use a minimum of 6 pounds or 6 kilos a hectare of seed. Otherwise, it won't work. I mean, people were relying on it to have weed control. That's the same thing for crimson clover. It's the same for Persian clover. You have to make sure you use enough seed. It's not about robbing the plant, because what I'm trying to do is actually trap water inside there. I'm trying to keep everything cool. I'm trying to keep the ground covered. Now, the other thing that we're noticing with companions like this and in intercropping, but with low growing companions, is that they trap a lot of the diseases down low. So we get a lot fewer fungal diseases and we get a lot of less splash diseases on our crops by having a companion in there. So that's another reason to do that. So the seeding rate, I would say if you're using like chickpeas, that you can see the chickpeas were under half the seeding rate. Half the seeding rate would be about 44 pounds to the acre. And so maybe, 44 kilos a hectare. I went a little bit lower, but I think this rate, but part of that's because a couple of years before I did 44 and I thought I could get away with less and make it cheaper for myself. That's, I was trying to find that balance where I have enough to feed my crop, enough to compete with the weeds, but I'm not spending more money than I need to. And so I think that's the balance that you're looking for. And the same with lentils. Lentils, I absolutely go half rate. They need half rate. Chickpeas can go a little less than half a rate. And on all your small seeds, your clover seeds, crimson clover, Persian clover, a mixture of Persian or crimson clover, I would stay at that 6 to 8 kilos a hectare. And I would, and if you're using a mix, then, you know, like with the larger seeds, like when I was using a mix in my canola, so in this case with a grass, I had the grasses down much lower than that. So Sarah, I had if I had a broadleaf crop, then I had the grasses down to, oh, probably 15 to 20 kilos a hectare, maybe less, depending on what it was, just to make sure I didn't compete with my broadleaf. I wanted them to grow, but I didn't want them to grow too much. And I would mix that with other things. So sometimes I was even down on some of the grasses, like when I was growing oats in there, I was at 5 kilos a hectare on the oats, with other plants in there. I think I had flax, and then I had a lentils because they take the cool weather too. And that was one of my companions for my canola.
So we had a couple of comments from Joe and Helen, who are either new to farming or farming at a smaller scale, and yeah, like what kind of advice would you have for people that are starting out? How do you approach the decision making around improving soils through diverse plantings like companion cropping?
So when you say small scale, are we doing gardens, market gardens, or something like that?
Well, Jo said she's got 30 acres.
Okay.
Feel free to
I know that we had the
Jo. Sorry.
Okay, I know that we were having the conversation with like market gardeners today, about growing companions. And companions in potatoes, companions in other vegetable crops and whatnot. On a small scale, I would say go for low growing things, don't go for vining things, don't try vetch. You know, you want things that that will allow your cash crop to be your cash crop and won't compete. I have seen, if you have something tall, like let's say you're growing sunflowers, let's say you are growing faba beans even. If you're growing faba beans, you can grow like a low grass of some kind, or even just grow really sparse. Like just grow, if you think of the entire seed mix, put in like 13% cereal in with the mix, just enough to screw up insects to have a different color in there. So you want to pick an oat, you want to pick maybe a barley with a slightly different color. And the reason for that is that as the insects are flying over, they will be looking for pure stands. So if you think about canola, for example, you know, when you have that really yellow field, like super yellow, if you put like anywhere up to, well, actually 16 to 18% barley in a canola crop will actually almost completely mitigate your flea beetle and your lygus bug problem. And part of that's just because as they fly over, what they've got is they've got these tall stalks of something else, and it just diffuses the color a little bit in there as they're flying over. And so they'll preferentially look to someone else's field that has a pure stand. And this is about, like, it's the same thing. Companions are about mixing up weed ecology, so the ecology of the existing weeds. They're also about mixing up the insects, so the insect ecology itself. So it's like, oh, there's these other plants here, like this isn't what I'm used to. And the idea with the diversity and having companions is to try and keep things sort of dynamic, so that nobody gets passive and nobody gets can just count on the fact that you know, it's going to be the same thing every year. Because the insects will adapt to that, the diseases will adapt to that, your weeds will adapt to it. So that's why we have crop rotation. And this is another way to just get diversity when you can't get a cover crop. And it's also, you know, fine to leave it, let it self-seed and then just seed into it the next year. I mean, you can do that too.
Thanks, Jill. And
And I think that works fine for small acreage, but just try it. You know, if you know what grows well for you, low growing, then just put a little bit in between the rows. Try underseedings and like oversowing. Put your crop in and then just sprinkle it in. I can tell you what we did. When we were oversowing the clover, we had a grass seed box on our 750 drill, and then we could just use the packer wheels to press the seed in between the rows. And it worked really well. Small seeds don't need to be pressed in. Whereas if you want to be really successful with your companions, you want to drill them.
Jo and Helen, feel free to jump in with any follow-up questions about what you're trying to achieve
Please
specifically.
do.
Terry has a question back to the very dry conditions we often experience. I think Terry's in South Australia. He's starting to understand the nutritional requirements are different when dry and we need to respond appropriately. What about biological activity? Can we do something with biology when we have little more than morning dew? Perhaps molasses.
No, you actually don't want to. I mean, this becomes like if water is limiting, like think about yourself, like think about your own body. If you couldn't get water, would you want to go out and run a marathon? No, you wouldn't. You'd be trying to conserve water. So all the biology in your soil is also trying to conserve water. They're trying to conserve it. A lot of your bacteria and your fungi will go into a dormant stage, and they'll be waiting for something to happen so that they can get going again. I mean, the reason that we want armor on our soils is so that we can insulate them from temperature variations. And this isn't easy in dry climates because, you know, hopefully 1 year out of, well, it would be nice if we're every year. But if we're at 1 year out of 3 or 4, you know, we want to have a great big cover and then hope that it lasts for 3 years to give us insulation. And you can see I'm running in this picture. I'm running into the same problem. I don't have much straw there. You know, but I'm also not growing a lot of biomass. Like, I mean, if you're in drought, like Tom was talking about, you don't grow a lot of biomass anyways. So, you know, this is where, actually looking to drought tolerant species, and I wouldn't want to stimulate my microbes more than they're there, because I mean, the other thing is that you want a biological community that is adapted to drought. And having plants there, you know, you'll have biology. Tom, you've got your hand up.
So if I can speak on behalf of Terry, Terry was in our little grower meeting yesterday, and we had a discussion around that soil priming idea that has come from the US, I suppose. And there is different soil priming products on the market over there. And then the discussion was around, well, can we, you know, make our own, say, you know, the Johnson Sioux compost and molasses and all that sort of thing. And is that a opportunity for us, or like you've just explained, is it possibly not going to be beneficial until we do have opening rainfall?
I think that I think they are beneficial. I mean, I think you can prime. I mean, that the whole thing about using cover crops, right, is to prime your soil. So if I start making a transition, like if I'm going to transition to organics, the first thing I'm going to do is seed the cover crop or a forage crop and then start in. because then I'm going to be building my biological activity. But when I get into a drought, things need to rest. I mean, we need plants in there so that we can maintain population. But we don't want to stimulate a population and then have it fizzle. I mean, that's sort of like me putting the seeds in the ground and I got one rain, so I was like, I'm going to get after this. And then I got one rain, and then I got 3 days of hot, dry weather. And, a week later, I got 3 days of hot, dry weather, and all the seeds that germinated died. You're doing the same thing. You get them going when the soils are moist enough, and then you can run the risk of having them be a drain on the plant, because remember that more biological activity in and around the seed, requiring more root exudates, is actually requiring a lot of energy from your plant. So I think that in stressful situations, we have to be mindful of the fact that the plants are stressed out to a certain extent, and that we don't want to be getting our microbial system, like all the microbes, up and growing. And especially if you don't have good soil structure and you don't have predator-prey interactions and mineralization, then all you're going to do is create a situation where you actually have the microbes competing with your plants for nutrients. And your plants will lose, and the microbes will win. And you'll be, looking at a situation where you're going to need more fertility then. So that's just to bear in mind when you're stimulating. Everybody talks about, well, I need to stimulate my microbial community. Well, it's there. Everybody has microbial community. And also, there's very few soils that are actually dead. And so what you want to do is encourage a more diverse community, that one that can withstand some drought. The other thing is that putting sugars is, you want tough ones. You want plants, you want microbes that can take a diversity of exudates, and not just sugars, and not just use elements. And you really don't want your microbes competing with your plants for nutrients. You really don't want that. It has to be plants first, microbes second. And then when you have good soil structure, think about all the predator-prey interactions that you get. We don't talk about that enough. Everybody talks about their microbes. I gotta stimulate microbes. I would rather that you stimulate protozoa and nematodes and your predators, the things that are preying on your microbes, so that you actually have mineralization. And then you have that microbial biomass being converted into feces and other materials that will actually hold water and keep things in and around the roots. Tom.
So thinking about like biological seed treatments then, so we're going to be sowing our crops probably bone dry and waiting for rain. We typically put on a mycorrhizal seed treatment, and we also put a Johnson Sioux on, plus a few little minor trace elements. Still happy to see that done, or is that in the same, could that become an issue in dry conditions? Or by the time it does rain, the Johnson Sioux is just really there for signaling, and it's not going to be live biology by the time it does rain. By the time we put a seed treater on the seed, into a truck, into a seeder, into the ground.
That's a really good, I like that. The Johnson Sioux, I prefer the Johnson Sioux. The reason for that is that you do have all these, it's not just the microbiology and the soil biota that you get from that, but it's also all the complicated molecules that come when you do fermentation. So the polyphenols and the humic acids and things like that you're coating your seed with. Those things are really important. And if you don't get the biology, no big deal. The mycorrhiza, I mean, are your soils really that deficient in mycorrhizal fungi? I mean,
Oh,
I know that I
is
know
there a
that
way, is there a way to
when
test that, Jill?
what's that?
Is there a good way to test for mycorrhizal?
Yeah, there is a way to test that, Tom. And I would test it before I'd spend money on an inoculant there. Because
Okay.
mycorrhizal spores, especially, I mean, Australia, the species that are primarily in Australia and probably in your soils would be Acolospora, Scutelospora, and those have really resistant spores. They will last like 20, 30 years and still be viable. So, and then anything that was any root material that was colonized will retain its ability to colonize any root that comes in contact with it. So bear that in mind. The way to test that would be to actually take some of your soil, take like a scoop and try and get down to 6 inches if you can. And take it in the row, like take it in the row. And then you, with that sample, you can use just small, like, small jars or small pots and mix it half with sand, good quality sand. And just to make sure that you don't get inoculant from the sand, just run it through the microwave, wet it down and run it through the microwave and heat it up 2 times for a minute each, so that, and then let it cool off. And then mix half the soil with half the sand. So it's a 50-50 mix, 1 part sand, 1 part soil. Mix it really well, and then seed onions into it. Not the onion sets, but actually onion seeds. And because the seeds, like onion roots, grow really nice and straight and come out. And then you can just, with the sand, you can just pull them out. And so when we're culturing mycorrhizal fungi, we always use sand culture. Pull them out, rinse them off, and then use the yellow color that they form. And you can do a percentage, and you can look at your different soils then and go, okay, these ones are 20% colonized, and these ones are 50% colonized. Or you can say, oh, I've got nothing, in which case, yeah, use an inoculant.
Is there more information about this online, Jill?
I think so, but if there isn't, I will provide it. How about that?
Yeah, it'll be interesting for people to test out. We are
Yeah,
at
I mean,
time.
that is the easiest way.
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you everyone for joining. I should wrap us up because it is, we have been on for just about an hour. Thank you, Jill. We really appreciate your knowledge and experience, and thank you for making it work today. And thank you everyone for jumping on. We have our last Cropping Convo tomorrow with Matthew Newell from New South Wales DPI. He's going to be talking about his work around developing a perennial wheat and rye in Australia, which is really exciting. Thank you, Jill.
So Courtney, can you provide make sure that people have access to my email address so that if anybody wants to have further conversations or has more questions, feel free to email me.
Yeah, definitely. I will definitely pass that on. And I'll try to pass on any resources or anything that's come up today. And thank you, Tom, for your conversation. We really appreciate your experience. And Rob and Terry, it's great to hear from you guys. So do not be sorry.
Thank you
Enjoy.
so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Enjoy the afternoon.